theme of rebel religion this morning. Our call to worship comes from the comedian John Fugelsang, who wrote, "Jesus was a radical, non-violent revolutionary who hung around with lepers, hookers, and crooks. Wasn't American and never spoke English. Was anti-wealth, anti-death penalty, anti-public prayer, but was never anti-gay, never mentioned birth control, never called the poor lazy, never justified torture, never fought for tax cuts for the wealthiest Nazarenes, never asked a leper for a copay. Was a long-haired, brown-skinned, homeless, community-organizing, anti-slut-shaming Middle Eastern Jew." One of our longtime members, the Honorable Bob Allen, passed away 8 days ago. And he liked to tell this story of his father. His father and his grandfather and grandmother, his father's family had joined the Presbyterian Church in Grand Junction, Colorado, because when they arrived in Grand Junction, they couldn't find any other Quakers at that time in Grand Junction. And they became active in that Presbyterian church, and his father used to teach Sunday school in that Presbyterian church, and Bob said his father would emphasize the teachings of Jesus over the teachings of the Presbyterian church. He said, Bob would tell the story, he said on one occasion when Bob was still a pretty young fellow, now this would have been about 80 or 85 years ago, his father told Bob when he was still young that if Jesus were ever to return, one of the first things he would undoubtedly do would be close down all the Christian churches for their failure to propagate his teachings and even their betrayal of his teachings. Now Bob said he thought that was pretty interesting. And he remembered walking by a church sometime later and thinking, hey, if Jesus comes back, you're going to have to close your doors. The sermon this morning on rebel religion is dedicated to our old friend, to the memory of our old friend, Bob Allen. Rebels, you might know, are the source of human progress in many ways. Rebels are the innovators, the chance takers, the seers, the saints, the troublemakers that help us evolve. Buddha was a rebel and a reformer. So was Lao Tzu and Confucius and Zoroaster and Socrates and thousands of others. Dorothy Day and Susan B. Anthony and Gandhi and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were all rebels. And as every rebel knows, if you truly rebel against something, there is frequently a pretty heavy price to pay for that rebellion. So building on the story that Bob Allen used to tell, there is, of course, a powerful argument to be made that Christianity as we know it would be pretty much unrecognizable to Jesus of Nazareth if he were to return. Not because the teachings have been lost, but because they have been largely ignored. In a world where churches did, in that time, and still do, mostly represent the status quo, Jesus taught a thoroughly rebellious religion. In a beautiful essay, Jonathan Gallagher wrote, "Jesus is whatever we want him to be, and most of all, nice. A suitable addition to a comfortable lifestyle. Today's Jesus is more a figment of our imagination than anything like the person who lived and walked and talked and made a difference 2 millennia ago. For in our niceness and pleasantness, the true Jesus is transformed into icons and images, greeting cards and statuettes. The picture is what we want, not the disturbing reality of what he said and did. Jesus was never viewed as safe, as a safe option in his lifetime. He was always seen as someone radical and dangerous. Only with the passing of the years has his revolutionary nature been accommodated into a placid, reassuring, and comfortable faith. And if you read the Gospels, if you read the teachings of Jesus, and you take them seriously, you know that this is true. The whole Sermon on the Mount is an attack on traditional, formal religion. It rejects tradition and it rejects piety. Don't make your prayers, your fasting, or your giving obvious, he says. Encouraging other people to think how devout you are, trying to prove your spirituality. Reject pretense. Reject what others think. Reject material concerns. It's a litany of inverse thinking. Blessed be the poor in spirit. Rejoice in persecution. Happy are those who mourn. Say what? Not only don't murder, don't even insult anybody. Don't swear or complain. Just say yes or just say no. No more eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. Forgive your debtors, for your heart is where your treasure is. And give up your judgments. Try that sometime. Give up your judgments, Jesus says, for in the act of judging, you prove yourself to have more faults than those you judge. Forgive your brother 7 times? No, says Jesus, don't even count. You think your wealth and comfort are a sign of God's blessing? Guess again. It's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. So this ministry of Jesus certainly includes comforting the afflicted, but it's mostly, vast majority, is about afflicting the comfortable. He challenges all the religious norms. Remember that call to worship. Jesus was a radical, nonviolent revolutionary who hung around with lepers, hookers, and crooks, and so on. It was all about sticking it to the man. Someone once said, Christianity is a great idea. Somebody ought to try it sometime. It's also worth noting, I think, that Jesus was ordered to be killed by crucifixion, and in the Roman world of that time, crucifixion was a punishment that was reserved solely for the crime of sedition, that is, treason. Our own tradition, Unitarian Universalism, draws heavily on this rebel side of religion, though we lean more on the heresy side than on the sedition side of things. Heretic and heresy, by the way, comes from a wonderful old Greek word. It basically means one who chooses, or one who has a choice or makes choices. In Reformation times, which were dangerous times, people like Faustus Socinus and Michael Servetus, Francis David, Giorgio Biandrata, Mano Simons, Juan de Valdez, Bernardo Chino, these people began writing and preaching variations on what was called at the time the Unitarian heresy. These deeply spiritual people concluded that what Scripture really said was that the mystery of the heart, at the heart of the universe, what most of people called God, was more likely and best represented by a unity rather than a trinity divided up into parts. And that's where the name Unitarian comes from. And the refusal to stay silent about this brought many of our spiritual ancestors to jail, to personal disgrace, and occasionally burned at the stake. They suffered the wrath of organized religion for doing horrible things like believing that people had the right to make up their own minds about their theology. Can you imagine? For horrible things like trusting in direct experience over church doctrine. For horrible things like believing that baptism should be reserved for adults who can choose it freely instead of forced upon children who don't know any better. They were punished for thinking that the purpose of religion, was to take theological questions seriously and maybe live into the answers too. For thinking that Jesus might have been a man and a teacher and a leader, but maybe not God. They were arrested and tortured for holding a radical position that, being reconciled with God might be available to everybody instead of reserved for just a very elected, selected few. In the 1800s, people like William Ellery Channing and Ralph Waldo Emerson, Louisa May Alcott, Elizabeth Peabody, Theodore Parker again rebelled, not only against traditional Christianity, but even against the Unitarian Church that they were a part of at the time. The old joke is that Emerson left the Unitarians because they were too conservative, and the Unitarians have been following him ever since. They questioned the source of religious authority, and in doing so, they laid the theological foundations for the religious pluralism that we still practice. In the 20th century, people like John Dietrich and Charles Potter, Sophia Lyons-Foss, and Clarence Skinner and others rebelled again. They opened the way for Unitarians and Universalists to explore theological questions and spirituality through all manner of human expression, including but not limited to religion, through science and art, poetry, story, culture, mythology, and symbol. So we are in a tradition of religious rebels and heretics, raised on heresy, right? Sticking it to the man, generally proud of our role in moving the religious conversation forward. The rebels of history, a lot of these people I've been talking about, were people very much of their own time. And what they were doing, they were responding to the dogmas and limitations of their own time, looking for, trying to live into an authentic response to their time. And this raises a wonderful question for us. As the inheritors of rebel religion, what will be our response to our time? Allow me to suggest that just like Jesus and the Buddha and all those other folks, well, maybe not all those other folks, but a whole bunch of those other folks, that the rebellion needed in our time is a rebellion against all the various forces out there that seek to divide and isolate us, that seek to compartmentalize us, that seek to teach us that there is an us and there's a them, that seek to teach us in ways both blatantly obvious and sometimes almost unbelievably subtle that we are isolated beings, alone in our bubbles and in our thoughts, disconnected from each other, from the earth, and from the mystery at the heart of the universe that some of us call God. As the events in Ferguson have made clear, as the media has sought to exaggerate, as the laws and the courts have come to support, we are a nation of people deeply divided, barely even speaking the same language. But at our best, at our very, very best, right here at First Unitarian Denver, in language and imagery of our time, at our very best, I believe, I have faith that we have begun an answer. I think the answer begins with this acknowledgement, this basic acknowledgement that we are in fact all connected. We're made of the same stuff. We breathe the same air. We are each and all sustained by the exact same chemical and cosmic forces. We are infinitely, exquisitely, inextricably connected. In our congregation, we say there's a unity that makes us one. It binds us forever together in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We, I believe, are born into a covenant with the cosmos and each other long before we make any intentional covenants with each other. That is the start of our rebellious answer. There is a unity that makes us one, the seeds of our rebellious response to our time. And I think that answer starts here, and I think it gets further developed over here. On the universalist side of things, this idea, this proposition, this unprovable article of faith that all souls are sacred and worthy. Every single one. No exceptions anywhere. I can think of no more potent motivation for justice work and no more challenging spiritual discipline to try to live into than this faithful commitment that all souls are sacred and worthy. So I think it starts here. I think it gets developed here. And it gets realized haltingly. In fits and starts, barely, imperfectly, in little glimpses of truth and kindness and grace, one step forward, two steps back, the most frustrating, demoralizing, most powerful, most rewarding, most soulful work I think any of us have ever attempted to do. Tagore wrote, "I've spent my days stringing and unstringing my instrument, while the song that I came to sing has remained unsung." Yet that's why we're here, I believe. Even in our largely white, middle-class, educated, privileged skin, we're here to be part of the rebellion. Even you. We're here to be part of the rebellion, knowing that we need a tradition and a people we can trust and be faithful to, knowing people who will keep us honest on this journey of the mind, the heart, and the spirit, moving toward a transformation that grounds us in the world, grounds us and connects us to each other and to the earth and to God. I like to quote the theologian Marva Dawn. She spoke recently in an interview about how almost everybody gets church wrong. People say, go to church, I've got to go to church, like it's some kind of obligation or duty. That's terrible theology, she says. It's terrible theology, and if you speak bad theology, you will live bad theology. She said, you can't go to church. You can't do that. You can't go to church. You are the church. You are the church. We go. We go to be equipped for the rebellion. We go to be strengthened. We go to connect with other rebels. We go to deepen our connection to the mystery at the heart of the universe, which some of us call God. We go because even rebels can't do it all by themselves. We go hoping that if Jesus ever does come back, he won't close our doors.